Thank you, Mr. Khera, and thank you, Mr. Rathi, for this wonderful message. We are thankful to have the Chief Economic Advisor of India, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, joining us virtually from New Delhi. Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran is current Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Dr. Nageswaran has earned his doctoral degree from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst in 1994 for his work on exchange rate behavior. In 1985, he received a postgraduate diploma in management from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. In his corporate career spanning 17 years, from 1994 to 2011, Dr. Nageswaran was a currency economist at the Union Bank of Switzerland, head of research and investment consulting in Credit Suisse Private Banking in Asia, head of Asia Research and Global Chief Investment Officer at Bank Julius Baer. Prior to his current role, he was part-time member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India from 2019 to 2021. Dr. Nageswaran is an honorary senior advisor to the International Financial Services Authority of India and has also advised the Indicus Foundation on Financial Inclusion and Dwara Research on Financial System Design. We thank Dr. Nageswaran for joining us virtually and invite him to address our audience today on the importance of ESG in the national development and corporate responsibility in promoting sustainability from the government's perspective. Over to you, Mr. Nageswaran.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you are able to see me and hear me well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Tarak Patel, President of the Federation of Gujarat Industries, Mr. Samir Khera, Dr. Anjan Ray, and other distinguished office bearers of the Federation of Gujarat Industries, ladies and gentlemen. I begin with my apologies for the inability to be present with you, although I would have very much loved to be there, and I was hoping to be there until very recently. Today and tomorrow happen to be the last 2 days of India's G20 presidency. From December 1st, Brazil takes over. So in connection with the last 2 days of India's G20 presidency, several events have been organized, and that is the reason why I am unable to be present with you. Please accept my sincere apologies. So the topic of the conference today is indeed important. We all need our future to be better than the past, and it should not be better just for a few years or even a few decades. It must last as long as possible, preferably into eternity. It should be sustained. And I use the word sustain is to sort of surviving through time and flourishing, rather than in the meaning of sustain that we all have gotten used to. I'm going to tell you today that E, S, and G all matter separately, but the concept of ESG taken together in practice has become a fad. And therefore, participants in this conference must take away the message that E and S and G matter, but not what they have become as part of this ESG, the fad. Let me start with a comment by economist Thomas Sowell of the United States. He published in 1987 a book called A Conflict of Visions. It is now a classic. He offers a simple and powerful explanation in that book of why people disagree about politics, and I'll connect it to the concept of ESG. Sowell argues we disagree about politics because we disagree about human nature. We see the world through one of two competing visions, each of which tells a radically different story about human nature. There are those with unconstrained vision. They think that humans are malleable and can be perfected. They believe that social ills and evils can be overcome through collective action that encourages humans to behave better. To subscribers of this view, poverty, crime, inequality, and war are not inevitable. Rather, they are puzzles that can be solved. We need only to say the right things, enact the right policies, spend enough money, and we will suffer these social ills no more. This worldview is the foundation of the progressive mindset. And if I may add in my words, this worldview is the foundation of this ESG, the concept. By contrast, those who see the world through a constrained vision lens believe that human nature is a universal constant. No amount of social engineering can change the sober reality of human self-interest or the fact that human empathy and social resources are necessarily scarce. People who see things this way believe that most political and social problems will never be solved under quotes, but they can be managed. This approach is the bedrock of conservative worldview. So there are two worldviews. One is that spend enough money, enact the right things, say the right things, and we can solve many problems. The other one is a realist view. Now, the reality is that humans do act in self-interest. Therefore, it is an important public policy challenge and the political economy challenge to marry self-interest with actions that they need to take for the collective good. Mandating it or shaming people into action will not necessarily work all the time because people have to factor in the cause. And when we say that the long run matters, indeed the long run matters and delayed gratification is important. At the same time, we do get to the long run through series of short runs. So how do we get companies, firms, enterprises, individuals to behave in a manner that their self-interest is aligned with public goals and public good, which is environment, social, and governance? And that is where the most important principle is that the cost of our action should be internalized rather than externalized. If we bear the cost of our actions, which have an impact on E, S, and G separately, then we will act in our own self-interest to minimize those costs, and in the process, we will be causing less damage to the environment. Because climate change is indeed going to be with us, whether it is human induced or induced by nature, that is beside the point, but global warming is a fact of life. And we need to do whatever we can to minimize not only the prospect of the extent of warming that we have to endure in future, but also we have to, more importantly, act to minimize the consequences of the warming that has already taken place because of the carbon emitted by other countries. When we talk of social aspect of the ESG, the problem is that some of these things do take time to evolve. Countries did not arrive at their current set of social indicators or social policies or social practices in a vacuum. These things evolved along with economic growth and development. The same thing to do with governance. If you read The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto, which was published in the early part of the millennium, he argues and he shows that a member of parliament in the United Kingdom said in the 18th century that several justices in the UK court system could be easily bought for one chicken and sixpence. So institutions over time evolve, and economic growth does automatically bring about the need for certain institutions. Like, for example, India took a long time to have insolvency and bankruptcy courts, and they are now there. They are a reality now. Computerization was resisted for a long time in public sector and so on, but now as opportunities arose, technology is now accepted. So there are many things that cannot be foisted from the outside, nor can they be accelerated ahead of economic growth. Otherwise, social and governance policies or culture or practices will actually end up constraining growth, which in turn will constrain the evolution of social and governance policies and practices. And sometimes social and governance policies could be used also as instruments of non-tariff barriers by developed countries, and we need to be watchful about it. Much as we want to make appropriate practices the norm of behavior for businesses, we should also be mindful that we do operate in a competitive world where history tells us that many of these things have been used as instruments of trade policy coercion on the part of advanced nations. Therefore, we need to separate the rhetoric from the substance. And that is what I get into next. Apart from separating the rhetoric from substance, we also need to be mindful of the fact that form is not the same as substance. The problem in creating many of these buzzwords and fads is that businesses across the world, and I came from the financial services industry where I was employed for more than 2 decades. In general, the financial services industry around the world sometimes used to be very good in complying with the letter of the law, rules and regulations, but not the spirit of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had frequent crises. So therefore, reducing everything into form filling and ticking boxes and naming and shaming means that businesses will find ways to comply with the letter of these practices and concepts rather than complying with the underlying spirit of it. So what is it that businesses can do to actually practice E, S, and G? One is to make sure that we do not let effluents get into our water and air, because for India, and today's Economic Times talks about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the quality of air, and our reliance on individualized modes of transport. When India's size dictates that we cannot have the same modes of economic growth and prosperity as the United States has, with 3 times more land mass than India has. And therefore, if 140 crore Indians want to have more than one vehicle, 4-wheeler in their homes as the Americans have, India will be permanently polluted and we will all have lower quality of life and air to breathe. So in that sense, our policies with respect to environment as businesses should be about managing our effluents and pollutants in the air. Environment and social consideration together means we do pay our MSME suppliers on time, and we do not come up with excuses to delay our payments to them, and we accept their invoices. When we accept their invoices for GST input credit, we should also accept their invoices as legitimate claim for payment. Third, we will act in the interest of environment and social and governance concepts if we do invest for the long term in research and development. Indian private sector in general invests far less in research and development for long-term growth, because naturally profits reinvested in research and development mean that there is less cash to be taken out by shareholders in the near term. And this is where actually many of these concepts basically morph into considerations of delayed gratification versus instant gratification. As long as we incorporate a longer term horizon into our planning processes, then our behavior will be consistent with social and larger considerations rather than only narrow considerations. For example, 2 days ago, when I was coming back from a flight from Hyderabad on Monday, I was in the aero bridge heading into the aircraft. The line was very long, so hence passengers were getting into the aircraft very slowly. So I was checking some messages on the phone and moving slowly because anyway the line was very long. While I was looking at my phone, the young man standing behind me actually came ahead of me and overtook me and stood in the queue in front of me. After all, this is a line that is getting into the aircraft. He is not losing out by waiting, nor was I not moving. I was moving very slowly because the line was moving very slowly. And I asked him what the problem was. And he said he is impatient and therefore I was moving slowly and therefore he had to get ahead of me. That irritated him. Look at the kind of impatience and irritation this person displayed at the cost of good manners and civility. Translated into business setting, this is the kind of customer service and consumer orientation that our businesses have if we really believe in ESG. We cannot forget practices of fairness and reasonableness and consumer interest in mind in our business practices if we are really sincere about ESG. So I just kept a timer for myself. I have only 1 minute to go. In October 2023, well-known Professor Aswath Damodaran of the Stern School of Business wrote an article just 2 months ago in New York in Financial Times. And he says in the first beginning part of the article, and I quote him, "Born in sanctimony, nurtured with hypocrisy, and sold with sophistry, ESG grew unchallenged for a decade, but it is now facing a mountain of troubles, almost all of them of its own making," unquote. So basically what he says is that in the end, ESG is a testimonial to the consequences of letting good intentions overwhelm good sense and allowing the selling imperative to define and drive mission. So my submission to all of you is to go beyond the rhetoric, look under the hood, and incorporate practices that are sustainable for the long term. Internalize costs and focus on things that you can do to start with today, such as paying our MSME suppliers on time, investing in R&D, controlling our pollutants and effluents, treating customers fairly and reasonably. And this is where E, S, and G start. I wish the conference very honest and open debate, discussion, introspection, and reflection. I once again apologize for not being able to be there physically, and I hope having heard that the FGI is a 105-year-old institution, it would be an honor to be with you on another occasion in the future. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my thoughts with you on this important conference. I wish you all a good and productive day. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nageswaran, for joining us virtually. And this was a wonderful address. You did set the tone for the conference today. We are indeed thankful to you for taking your time from your busy schedule and addressing the participants today. We also take this opportunity to invite you to our federation and our cultural city of Vadodara whenever your schedule is convenient. Thank you.